What we're going to be covering here is what I would consider highly advanced information. And basically what I'm going to attempt to do is I'm going to attempt to teach you the keys to abundance. So, what are the things that society, free energy, and consciousness all have the ability to do? Well, they all have the ability to produce abundance. Free energy is itself an expression of abundance, the ability to draw energy out of some type of an environment to put it in good use. So with this principles, these kind of spiritual high-level principles, we're going to be able to take this understanding and apply it personally in our lives. And then we're going to be able to apply it to the world to actually have like a master recipe to make the world a better place. So again, this is going to be some fairly advanced information. So is there a connection between free energy, self-mastery, social harmony, and abundance? So the common element of all these is their product, abundance. And that's what we're going to be talking about today. So some of the factors that lead into this are coherence, receptivity, fractality. These all govern free energy devices, consciousness, and societies. So this knowledge that I'm going to be giving you here today, this is something I've been accumulating for many years. It's a kind of a distillation of many different types of research, because I'm a pretty heavy, what I would call an archetypal thinker. So I'd like to think about a lot of the things that I'm studying, and I noticed that there was a big connection between all these things. So we're going to cover all that today. So first, we're going to go over free energy. So the way I'm going to lay this information out is I'm going to speak about the principles that govern free energy devices, and then I'm going to use these same principles to describe how your own consciousness works, the very body vehicle that you have to express your life and your spiritual essence. And then we're going to take those same principles and we're going to see how that we can use them to understand how to make a golden age society. So as we go through this, I'm going to throw a lot of information at you. I'm going to try to re-emphasize the same points that are most important. And we're going to look at the same kind of concept from multiple different angles, because a lot of the stuff that we're going to be covering here, it's so abstract and it's such a kind of a universal law principle. So we need to look at it from multiple angles in order to really get a full grasp and understanding of it. So first, let's define what free energy is. So free energy refers to an energy generating device that has the capacity to output more usable energy than it needs to operate. So that's what we mean by producing more energy or free energy. So some examples of free energy devices is the repulsine, which is Victor Schauberger's device. He developed that in the early 20th century. And his work was actually hijacked by the Nazis to make their secret space program, Nazi secret space program technology. And then that technology was later used by the Americans and other agencies. And then we also have the Searle device, Searle effect generator. So those are two really good examples. I chose those examples specifically because you can go online and you can find a lot of really great research to substantiate or to prove to yourself everything I'm going to be talking to you about here. So when we talk about free energy, it's important to remember we're not talking about free as in it comes out of nowhere. It's free in the sense that it's freely available in the environment. It's there. If we can just figure out a way to access it, then we can use it to our advantage. So another term that we hear a lot when we talk about free energy is over unity. What the heck does that mean? Well, over unity refers to the ratio of energy needed to run a device versus its output. If it takes 10 energy units to operate a device that produces 15 energy units of output, that means we have an over unity effect of 150% efficiency. So the free energy comes from the over unity effect. And a really good kind of interesting fact to consider here is a lot of ufologists, so the people who study UFOs and extraterrestrials and things like this, they assert that extraterrestrials and the deep state and the secret space program, they also use free energy technology. We're actually going to look at one of those examples briefly today. What's going on here? There we go. Okay. So now what I'm going to do, I'm going to go over some of the bigger principles, kind of like what are the ingredients that we need in order to create a free energy dish, so to speak, to use a cooking analogy. Well, I've kind of boiled these down for you, again, because a lot of this stuff is fairly high-level concepts, and I wanted to make it very easy to understand. So that's what we're going to go over here. So first, we have a device that draws energy from the environment through a coherent open system design. And we're going to go over that. But really the thing that allows us to get energy out of the environment is a device. We need something to actually grab that energy out. Well, where does this energy come from? Well, in a great many free energy devices, not all of them, but in a great many free energy devices, the supply of energy comes from the 0 point, or what's called the vacuum. So how do we actually get this energy out of the vacuum? Well, one of the mechanisms for this is entrainment. And entrainment is itself a mechanism whereby if you take a device and you resonate it or you tune it to the source of where this free energy is hanging out, then it will naturally start to flow towards the device and you can use it for some purpose. And that's what entrainment is. It's also the base in the science of sympathetic vibratory physics. So resonance with the 0 point, this is what actually allows us to access the energy. So the device is the thing that allows you to grab the energy. We tune it to the 0 point, that's where the energy is actually stored. And then it's the resonance with the 0 point that allows us to access this energy. Now, when we talk about open systems, what we're talking about is a method of understanding. So in this presentation, specifically in this section, I'm going to describe like the kind of the hard science, but then I'm also going to speak to how we as human beings understand this hard science. And that's really important, especially from a free energy perspective, because a lot of the critics of free energy, I would say that they lack the necessary philosophy skills in hand to properly understand what the free energy proponents are saying. So I'm going to actually give you those philosophy skills today. So you can so you will be basically an expert on this and you'll have a really good firsthand understanding of how this free energy science works. So what an open system is it's a system that has the ability to gather energy from an environment as well as the energy that it outputs. So an open system is something that has the ability to feed back on itself. And because of this feedback effect, it has the ability to purify the process of gathering the energy as well as enhancing it and building it up in the system. So a really good example of this, an analogy I should say, is if you imagine this quote unquote free energy is like kindling everywhere in a forest. So if you want to build a fire and you're in the middle of a forest, there's probably all pieces of wood floating around everywhere, but you can't actually use them. You need to do something in order to use that kindling so you can make a fire. And in effect, you are the device in this analogy. You go out and you gather up this free energy. You gather up this wood and then you bring it into a central location so that it can be used to start a fire. So an open system is that type of a system. We're going to be going over all that in much detail. So now we're going to break down the actual principles from a high level science perspective that actually makes a free energy device work. And again, we're going to go over this in much detail. So don't necessarily feel like you have to memorize this stuff. I'm going to, like I said, tell you about these principles from multiple different angles so that you have a really good, rich understanding. So first thing is called constructive wave interference. This is what focuses all the random energy in the environment so that it can be gathered and used in a specific device. And energy systems themselves are directional. So what the constructive wave interference is referring to is our ability through this device to take those directions of energy. You imagine that, everything's pointing in a whole bunch of different directions. But we need to get those directions to all point in the same place, in the same center, so that the energy can flow into that place so we can use it. And that's what constructive wave interference refers to. It's the ability of two waves to add together. And the process, the main engine that allows the energy that's in the environment to flow towards the center is what's called a fractal field. So it draws in and compresses energy and information into itself. So this is the science that we're going to use to understand how free energy devices work. So what is the mechanism that allows different pieces of energy to weave together so it can be drawn into the center? Well, that's called fractal embedding. So that's the actual technique. We're going to use this fractal field, this electromagnetic field, to gather up all this energy that's in the environment, and then we're going to weave it together like a tapestry, like a weaving of threads to create a piece of cloth, very similar to that. And that's the fractal embedding statement for that concept is the technique that we use to do that. And then the effect that causes is what's called fractal implosion. So when you take this free energy device, it produces an electromagnetic field that we would call fractal. And we call it a fractal because it has the ability to compress in energy and information into itself. And that creates an implosive effect. So it's taking energy that's hanging out in the environment and it's drawing it into the center. And the method by which that happens is called constructive wave interference again. Now, what is the output of a free energy device? Well, the output is a fractal explosion. So what you think of is that in order to create this implosive effect, we're compressing all this energy and information in, and it gets stored. So that means we're building up energy in a device. And then once we release it, it's a kind of explosion. Well, it's a fractal explosion in the sense that it's a very coherent, organized explosion. It's not just a kind of like random explosion. It's a very laser-like kind of clean type of explosion. So now let's actually get into how this free energy process works. So here, I added this image of an alien reproduction vehicle because I want to show you that in most of these free energy devices, we have a center where the energy is being stored. And if you look at, unfortunately, you probably can't see my mouse, but if you look at the outer edge of this alien reproduction vehicle, there's these components along the outer edge, and the surface itself. This particular design, I believe this comes from Michael McCandish, I believe. And his design is very complete insofar as describing the science. So if you really wanted to get a really heady explanation of what the electromagnetic physics involved is, you can look at this work. But the real point I wanted to emphasize here is that there's a center point, and this energy is going to be stored in the center point, and it's going to be used for some purpose. And in this particular case, once this free energy device is turned on, the energy gets stored and builds up inside the device. It creates a field around the UFO, or the alien reproduction vehicle, that actually shields it from space-time so it can make all these fancy maneuvers. And it can also, you know, depending on what they want to do with it, it can even cross into different time zones and things like this. So that happens because the device itself acts like an implosive kind of well. It draws energy from the environment and then it stores it in a center point so it can be used for various purposes. So what we're going to do now is we're going to cover some of the essential knowledge of the kind of the physics behind how free energy devices work. So in order to do this properly, we have to get to the essence of what some of these things are. It's really easy when we're talking about these something like free energy to throw around these terms, but if we don't define them properly, it's hard for us to have a deep substantive understanding. And I want everybody to have a deep, rich understanding of what this means. I prefer not to have any blind faith out there as much as possible. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to define very clearly a lot of terms that we've probably heard before. And this is going to give you a very rich, deep, in philosophy, it's called an epistemological foundation. So it's a really deep foundation for understanding how this works. You're going to gain intrinsic knowledge. And we're actually going to define intrinsic knowledge a little bit later. So this is all going to become really important as we go on. So how is an over-unity effect achieved? Well, all energy expresses itself as a structure, a geometric orientation of spatial and temporal components that we perceive as information. So what I'm basically saying by that is that when you think of energy, this energy creates some shape, and that shape is itself something that exists in time and space as a structure. What that means is that the information in that structure is the geometry, the shape that it looks like. And what the connection that we want to make here is that all energy, as it expresses itself in the universe, has to have some structure to it. It has a shape to it that we can see. And because it has a shape, that means we can take another device or another system, like a field, and we can actually arrange that so that we can work with the components to do something useful with that energy. So if you're not familiar with what we're looking at here to the right, this is a cymatics photograph. This is actually a series of plates where sand was placed on the plates and a vibrating, the plates were vibrated at a specific frequency to produce these different shapes. So what we're seeing here is that depending on the frequency, it actually changes the spatial orientation. It changes the shape. So what this slide proves to us is it proves that energy always expresses itself as some type of structure. And because the structure has relationships, it means that there's also an information in there. So energy and directions. The other thing that we need to consider is that energy expresses itself in some type of direction. So energy flows somewhere. If you're thinking about a river, the river flows from uphill to downhill. If you're thinking about the sun, the light from the sun comes from the sun and it flows outwardly in all directions in a radial pattern to hit all the planets and everything in the solar system. So energy, for the most part, not in all cases, but for the most part, has a flow. It always has a direction. And because it has a direction, we can line up these directions so that they add together constructively. So an electromagnetic field organizes the directions of energy so we can use it in a purpose. So we can measure energy as waves. So we can, when I say measure energy as waves, it allows us to understand what the energy is. And because we have that understanding, we can use that same science of understanding waves to then understand how free energy devices work and ultimately how consciousness works. So what you see here on the left, what is a pendulum swinging. And this swinging pendulum, if you ignore the graph part on the right-hand side, you would just imagine this pendulum swinging. It oscillates. So what we're talking about here is an oscillation. So if you look to the left of this diagram, you see G. These are different points that are plotted as the pendulum swings back and forth. When you look at G, that's when the velocity is 0. So if you think about a pendulum, when the pendulum's moving at the center point, that's when it's fastest. And then when it moves up, that's when it starts to slow down because of the force of gravity. And then it hits its peak. It actually stops very briefly for a moment. So if you think about this, if you look at all these points, and then you look at the graph, the velocity graph here, notice that the G and the A points are always at the 0 line. So what that means is that at points A and G, there's no velocity. Now when they're at the D, that means that the velocity is the highest, but the direction is different. And that's why it looks like a sine wave. This is why it looks like a wave. So really the main point I want to get at here, the thing they should walk away from, is that we can measure and understand how energy flows as a direction and as a wave. And because of that, that's going to allow us to create devices that work with where the components work with each other so that we can draw energy out of the field. So again, we talked about energy and information. Now we're going to really solidify it even more. So energy and information are one. They're two sides of the same coin. Anytime there's information present, there's also energy. Anytime there's energy present, there's also information. So all information is itself a configuration of energy vibrations creating a unique object or thing, either materially or metaphysically. So when we think about an object from a physics standpoint, they're actually what we call standing waves of vibrational energy. So nothing is truly still or motionless in the universe. And that's something that even modern day science and physics acknowledges. So if you've ever heard of the phrase, everything is vibration, that is itself one of the 7 Hermetic principles or 7 natural laws. And what it's basically describing is that everything you think is solid is actually this undulating, pulsating thing, which means that there's energy in there. There's something happening. There's energy and there's information and that we can draw from. And when I say standing wave, it means is that the flow of energy itself, it produces a cyclic static motion. So if you look at the right-hand side here, I took an image, it's actually a GIF, of a drain, a bathtub draining. And what you see here is that the shape of the whirlpool, it basically stays the same. It oscillates a little bit. But everything that makes that shape what it is actually moving, it's flowing. So every object that you can think of, every concept even, idea, is not really a fixed thing. It's not like a billiard ball where it just sits there. It's actually itself a flowing, undulating system. And that's what we call a standing wave. If you really want another fancy term, it's in quantum physics, it's called a dissipative state. And what's interesting is that we are dissipative states. So you like to think of yourself as like, oh, I'm this, I'm that, I have, these beliefs, I have that belief, I'm, this person, I'm that type of person. Well, those things are itself expressions of this flowing undulation, this constant flow that is your beingness. And then as well, society is the same way. We have certain societies and groups and cultural norms and things like this, but those things aren't really fixed. They're not in static. They're actually themselves these flowing, undulating systems. So what the point I want to have you walk away from here in this case is that everything you could think of in the universe, particularly energy, your own consciousness, and how societies work, are themselves dynamic flowing systems. And by understanding them as dynamic flowing systems, we can better work with them to produce the things we want. So here we're going to talk about constructive wave interference. So this is kind of the main engine that fuels the fractal field effect. So remember, the fractal field is the thing that creates the implosion. If you imagine if you took a fractal field and you threw it out, let's say you had a big messy floor and there was a lot of confetti everywhere because you just had a party. Well, if I gave you a magical cleaning device that had a fractal field in it, and you put it in the room with all the confetti everywhere, and you turned the fractal field on, what would happen is all of that confetti would naturally start to flow into the center. That's what a fractal field does. It creates an implosion effect. Well, the method that is used in the free energy device is what's called constructive wave interference. So when two or more waves add together non-destructively, the energy and information of each combines to form a new wave that is reflective of its parents. And I specifically used an anthropomorphic analogy or statement there, parents, because what we're essentially referring to is these waves basically generate some new wave. It's like they're having a child. So if you look on the left-hand side, which is the image for this slide, on the top graph, you have a waveform. And the amplitude, or the peak of this at point B of the red line, is a value of 1. So the strength of this first wave is 1. If you look to the second wave, you see that the value of the wave is 2. The amplitude is 2. And because the waves start off and move down with each other, that's called being in phase. So in other words, they move up, the peaks match and the troughs match. This is what's called a wave that's in phase. And because the wave is in phase, these waves can add together, and the energy and information in these waves will combine. And that's what you see in this third wave. So what's happening is that the free energy device is taking these two different sources of energy, these two different waves of energy, and it's using the fractal fields to tune them and orient them to change their direction so that they can line up with each other and go in phase. And then when that happens, the two waves combine, and you get a new wave that has the same energy value of the combining two previous waves and the same information. So that's what you see in the third wave here. That's why the amplitude of this third wave, or the peak, is a value of 3. So free energy devices are designed to absorb incoming energy. A really good example of this, if all this is a little confusing for you, think about it like this. I want you to imagine two people trying to pull a rock in opposite directions. You have one person on one side with a rope, you have another person on another side with a rope. They're both pulling with 100 pounds of force, but in opposite directions. Well, what happens? It's like a tug of war. The rock's probably not going to move anywhere, is it? Well, that's because those two forces are adding together destructively. Well, if one of the people goes to the other side and they follow and they partner up with that other person, if they combine forces, if they get on the same page with each other and have really good communications and work out what their mutual goals are so they can work together, then they can both combine their energy and move that rock. And they can move it further than they would have if they tried to do it individually. So that's what I'm talking about, constructive wave interference here. It's that we're taking these two energy systems, whether we're talking about a person, we're talking about components of a free energy device, we're talking about ideas in your own mind. When you orient those properly so that they can work together in harmony, then you can do more with that. Those forces and information add together. And that's what we're describing here with constructive wave interference. So components and resonance. So every free energy device has components. It has parts to it. And these parts have to work together to focalize the incoming energy of the whole system to a central point. So each part is in resonance with the whole system and other parts ensuring energy flows add together constructively. So when we say in resonance, we means that they can vibrate in the same frequency. And we're going to have a whole slide on resonance, but just to further emphasize this point, if you think about music, if anybody's ever heard live music before, all of the musicians on the stage or in the orchestra, they're all tuned to each other. And the reason the music sounds as beautiful as it does is because they're all in resonance. So they're all working off of the same baseline frequency. If a musician, let's say, breaks a string or doesn't tune, maybe they show up late to the performance and they don't have a time to tune and they start playing, you can hear it pretty easily when they're not in tune with each other. Well, it's just what I'm describing here. The analogy is that when something isn't in resonance, it can't work with the other things that are in resonance with each other. So when a musician is playing out of key, when they're playing the wrong note, you as the audience, you can hear that very easily. So using that concept of being in tune, now apply that same concept to a free energy device. All of the components in a free energy device work together in some fashion to produce some whole. And then that's what I'm describing here with this diagram. You don't necessarily have to know the technical aspects, but imagine that each of these arrows is itself a component. It's like a part. All these parts are going to work together so that the flow of their output is all going to move towards the center to create this flowing energy effect so it can be used for some purpose. So addition of energy vectors for implosion. Each component of a free energy device directionalizes energy toward another component in an additive fashion, be the electromagnetic field. So in other words, these components, they push and pull in harmony with each other. And because of that, their motions can add together. And that's what creates this inward flowing effect. That's also what creates the torus. Now, what's interesting is that the torus is itself the most efficient and organized system for energy flow in the universe. In particular, in physics, we call it fluid flow or fluid dynamics. So plasma, electromagnetic energies, things like this, air, water, we refer to them as fluids because they can move. And the most organized shape for a dynamic system of fluids, whether we're talking about plasma energy or energy itself or water or air, is a torus. So what's interesting here is that we're using the most efficient dynamic system that we've ever discovered, which is a torus. We can use that principle, that geometry, that shape, to create a free energy device. And in many cases, a lot of the very highly advanced free energy devices, especially the ones that are allegedly used by extraterrestrials, according to some researchers and insiders, they all have this toroidal kind of shape. So now we're going to get into fractal embedding. So we talked about how constructive wave interference allows two energy systems that are out in the environment that are maybe pointing in different directions. When we put the fractal field in the center of them, the fractal field is going to start to move those energy flows so that they work together and they start pushing energy into the same place.
Hey, what's going on, everybody? This is Neil with Portal to Ascension, and I just wanted to take a moment really quick and show you the Portal to Ascension platform. The presentation or the documentary that you just watched was one of our many productions that I've done over the years, created well over 1,000 workshops, events, conferences, retreats, webinars, and this is how our website works. If you want to go ahead and receive not only access to this presentation, but hundreds of other presentations that we have available for you right now for free. You can go to our website, you enter your name right here, you email right here, click sign up. Pretty soon we're going to be launching a new website, but the procedure is pretty much the same. Your name, email, sign up. Once you do that, you're going to get an email with your username and a temporary password. You then click login. Once you log in, you're going to see the whole entire backend laid out with all the webinars and presentations for you. Not only can you start typing by speaker name, topic, category, whatever you want, even letter, but you can scroll down this list here and sort by category. And I'm not going to read these off to you, but you can take a look. We have a lot of different topics: UFO disclosure, true world history, spiritual development, science, sacred geometry, and so much more. And then you can also search by speaker, which we have here alphabetically, or you can just browse the whole entire thing here and take a look at all these presentations. You are able to, if you can take a look up the top corner here, you're able to add to your watch list to watch these back anytime you want. So you can add to your watch list, it'll be put there, When you come back into the platform, you can continue watching where you left off. There's a documentaries tab, there's an interviews tab, and this is how the individual event page will look. So right now, you can go to the website, portaltoascension.org, put in your name and email, sign up. You'll get access to what you just watched, and there's so much more footage. There's free footage being added weekly. So really, this is a one-stop shop for consciousness, and there's always new valid content for you that is relevant for the times that we're currently in, where we're not only dissecting and delving deep into the ancient past, but also creating information that will empower us for the future to come. And here is an example of one of the event pages. This one's on Billy Carson, Quantum Macabre Manifestation. You can view it right there, description, speaker image, that will also go to his bio, and then also suggested webinars that you can tune into as well. And then of course, please do leave a comment and leave us feedback. So there you go, guys. That's our back end, and that's how Portal to Ascension works. Go ahead, go to the website right now, portaltoascension.org. Enter your name, email, sign up, take a look at the site, let us know what you think, and enjoy.